Hi. Hello. So, what the fire said was something along the lines of composition is what we're focusing on today, and the art of composition. I thought maybe for today we could do something more straightforward where you can follow along and see my process and paint along with me. And we'll be practicing with a value scale. I'll explain all of the supplies that you see on your desk before we get started. We're going to be using a watercolor, but just one color, probably black. That's what I'd recommend because that's the darkest one, and we're working with one value today. You could use a purple or the blue. Those are also very dark, but they're not as dark as the black. And you'll also notice you have a roll of washi tape here. They're all different colors. It doesn't matter because what that's for is for taping a border, which we haven't done before. In the past, I've put the tape on for my watercolor class, but today I want to give you a chance to do it yourself. And if you need any help, I'll help you. But we will tape these borders before we start painting. So that's what this is for. And you'll also notice you have two sheets of paper. One is extra small, and then one is a small sheet. This is for creating the value scale, which is what you can see in my little sketchbook here. It's a little bit washed out. Let me see if I can bring this down a little bit so I can see it better. So I made a 5-step value scale here. This one's with a very dark blue, and here's a black version. So darkest tone to lightest, which is just white. This is an empty square. And we'll be making this as we paint. And to prep, I can show you that I did these little sketches to figure out how I would compose the larger image. So as I was planning this, I made these three. This one was my favorite one. So I roughly followed this one for this larger version here. And I kind of just want to show you how many times it took me to kind of figure out what I want. These are pretty similar, slightly different. You might notice that some areas are a little bit lighter than the other one if you compare and contrast. And we're going to aim for this version, but they're pretty similar. Overall, the hierarchy is the same. The darkest darks are in the same place, the midtones, which is the middle, in the same place, and the lightest are generally in the same area. And I'll walk you through how we compose this here. And this is what we're going to be making today. Then this is our reference image. This is of Maple Falls in Santa Cruz in the forest of Nicene Marks. This is from my first date with my husband. This picture he took, I'm actually like way over here, but I cropped it out so that the composition would be nicer. So I'm not in the picture here, but I thought it'd be nice to use some landscape photography that I have personally. And take this as an opportunity to learn how to take a photograph and turn that into a painting. There is some creative design decisions that are made throughout this process from translating from a photo into a painting, and I'll show you how I make those edits because I don't want to copy this exactly. This is extremely busy, and when we're doing landscape paintings, especially quick ones, we only have so much time, so we have to decide what to leave out and what to keep in, depending on what we want to communicate. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Maybe first, if you haven't already, you can start with taping this here. And if you need help, I can come help you. This is pretty straightforward. You'll just try to align this on every edge, and you can have it overlap too and wrap it around if that's the easiest. So you can just simply pull this out and then rip the end off. Maybe for me it'll be easier if I start on this end. And it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned, just somewhere along that edge there. And here I'm going to wrap it around. I really like washi tape because it's very gentle. It doesn't rip the paper when you lift it, and it does cover the paper enough to where it won't bleed underneath. So it's just the right amount of adhesiveness for watercolor, in my opinion. I've tried using different masking tapes, and those, even the artist ones, tend to tear. And this has been the most reliable for me so far. And as a plus, it's also overall cheaper. And you can get many different widths for this too. Yes, this is nice for, this is a really nice thin tape here. And they're really pretty if you ever want to use them for decorations. This will just create a nice clean edge, and it helps elevate the presentation of a painting if you have this on versus not have it. Does anyone need help with theirs, Sherry? No. Velvet? Oh, you're almost done. That's a nice looking one. Almost there. There you go. Awesome. Everyone's got it? All right. So there we have our paper canvas. Now let's sketch out our value scale here. You can either make little boxes like I did, or you can draw circles. They don't have to be perfect, just large enough. And I recommend maybe on the top side of this paper, large enough for you to be able to paint it in. Yeah, I had 5 in a row, so roughly the same size. Circles work fine too. Also, this is a little bit of a preview of what we're doing on Thursday. It's gonna look something like that. Yeah. This one we'll be focusing more on brush strokes, I think, than the wet on wet technique. And we can actually layer with this one, I think. Okay, so there's our value scale. Now what we're gonna do is actually sketch this on here, and then we'll get started with painting. Give everyone a little more time. Let me have this up here as an example. So I'll just explain my thinking with this here for this composition, and you can compare it to the photograph. So what I did here was I wanted to find the 5 different values if I had to simplify it within this photograph, but I also really wanted to emphasize this waterfall and the foliage here. And if you squint at this, it kind of groups the values for you, and it makes the darkest parts stand out more and the lighter parts stand out. So kind of overall, it makes everything dimmer, but it helps your eyes and your brain group the values that are here. And overall, if you squint, you'll notice this is kind of all mid-tone with some shadows. This is all maybe somewhere between mid-tone to the darkest dark or black. This is the brightest thing in the entire image right here, the waterfall. So I'm gonna try to compose my painting in a similar way where this is the brightest thing. This is the only thing I've left completely white. Then everything else is darker on some level. So I did a whole layer of the second tone, which is the second lightest. We haven't made it yet, but it would be this one. And then I started to build darker and darker areas. Now, since we're using contrast to make things stand out, I made this all one tone, all this green or foliage here. Even though if you were to squint at this photograph, it kind of blends in with the rock if you were to remove the color, imagine it in black and white. But because I want it to stand out, I made it a separate tone. And then I made all of the rock a slightly darker tone than the foliage here. And that's what makes this pop out. If I had made this all the same tone, then they would all kind of blend in with each other. And then this would just stand out a lot more and we wouldn't really notice the foliage. So we're gonna paint layers where this comes out first, and then this is a little bit darker, and then the shadows will recede from these little parts here. These are just little details, but squinting at this here, and there are pretty much the darker areas. Any questions about that, or Does that make sense? So these are all different sections here. And I think it'll maybe be more clear once we try it ourselves and start building it in the painting. First, we'll need to sketch and establish where everything goes. So I'd recommend starting with the waterfall since that's our centerpiece. Let me see how I want to arrange this so you can see everything. Maybe right here. Okay, so if we eyeball and try to measure by ratio, this is kind of a little bit down from maybe a quarter way down the paper, and then it goes slightly down here a little bit further, but if I were to try to match that ratio, maybe it's about this big. So I'll mark it on here. And if you feel like moving something later, you realize it's not where you want it exactly, you've got the eraser. Hold on, let me make this more up close. And I'm going to draw this dark so you can see it. That's one column there. And this almost looks like it's in two separate sections because there's a ledge right here. So about halfway, I'll let this get a little bit bigger. And I'm making this pretty rough, so just using some straight lines to outline the placement and the overall size. And when I've got enough of a gap there for the ground or the water, I'm going to establish these lines that I see right here. Let's see if I can fix this exposure a little bit. Okay, that should be better. I've got a line here, slightly slanted, but if you draw it flat, that's fine too. That's our ledge. And then I'm gonna draw right there, and then I'm kind of outlining where I see different values. So I know this is gonna be all white, this section here. And then I'll also outline this ledge that's going through the middle. It's kind of like a big curve going this way. In terms of values, this is all in the midtones, the rocks here. And then when it comes to the foliage, I drew these loose shapes here that are roughly where I see them in the photo. And I'm making these cloud-like shapes. Some of these are a lot of little individual leaves if you look closely, but I've grouped them into larger bunches because that's how our eye kind of sees them, especially from a distance, they become grouped. So I will group them with my sketch as well. I think these, I should be using the kneaded eraser. These are kind of sitting on the ledge here. This is all very rough. We're mostly just trying to get the overall placement. Don't worry too much about details. And the painting we're going to be making is kind of a rough painting anyway, to begin with. It's a practice in establishing values and the overall composition. So you can consider what we're doing today to be a loose painting where we're more focused on designing the overall look than the details. I see some foliage here. Here, and right now what I'm doing is essentially outlining where I want the foliage to be, and within these little cloud-like shapes, or where all this foliage is, it's gonna be the second lightest tone that we have on our value scale. So I'm blocking these out so I know when it comes to the painting time, which ones to paint around, or which areas to paint around, so I can make sure I leave those areas lighter. So I'm outlining this lighter area right now, or areas. I'll pause there for a sec. I think I like this album enough to buy it. I'll play the preview again. Okay. And as you go, if there are any areas you want to fix or adjust, you can go back with the eraser like I am. I'm realizing there are some things I want to add here. And besides the foliage, the other things we can mark in are where some of these shadow areas are on these ridges. You can look at my painting example here as like something you want to follow if you'd like to. I've simplified the photograph, as you can see. I don't have nearly as much detail. So if you squint at the photograph, you'll see where the different sections of the rock are. You can kind of block those out through the sketch. Like I see this as its own section right here. And then down here too. This is a section. There's another. And this ledge. Anyone got questions so far? Anything good? Give everyone a little bit more time to finish their sketch. For anyone who's already done it, you have any questions or anything you want to talk about in terms of composition? Look good. We're all done, Suzanne? Awesome, okay. I think we can start soon. I see some people are still working on this sketch. Great. Yeah, I often work from photo reference, so I wanted to show you how I do it. And also show how many times I'll paint something before I actually finish a painting. I do it many times. These little thumbnails I'll do to figure out how I want to do my value hierarchy overall, and then I'll go larger to figure out the details. And then I'll do another version just to figure out the color. Okay, so looks like most people are ready. Now with this value scale, we're gonna make the same thing that I did in the sketchbook here. So we'll start with this lightest one here. What I'd like you to do is mix a very light black, or you could use, like I said earlier, the purple or the dark blue if you prefer to try those instead. Just know that it can only get as dark as what you see on the palette here. It can't get any darker than that. I'm gonna go with, I'll go with the black. I'll do another black one. So this light black is, or it's gonna be a gray. Probably will look something like this. And because we're gonna cover most of this paper with it, you're gonna wanna mix a lot. So I'd recommend dipping your brush a lot into the water to pick up more water.
You put a little bit of the brown in it.
Or the black, whichever dark color you're using. You'll get more contrast with the black than with any other color on there. But I think that like the blue or the purple could look nice too. And before you put it on your scale, you can test it out beneath somewhere, anywhere you have enough space, just to see if it's light enough. And it should be about yay light. If you've got a lot of water on there, sometimes it makes it look darker. You can lift it and remove some. Here I'm using my brush to lift it off, a dryer brush. Once you have it, I'd like you to actually fill in this square and then the three next to it on the left, because we're going to do this in layers. And try to make these even. Some of these have too much water. I can blot them out with a paper towel or use a brush that's been dried on a paper towel. Be about that light. And the first two times I painted this, I didn't mix enough paint, but you can mix more as you go. Now all I'm gonna do here is paint everywhere except on the waterfall and where it hits the water down here, because this looks white down here. So I'm gonna paint everywhere around it, and I want it to look pretty even. And it's okay to paint over the tape. It's there to protect the edges. And keep pulling this down. The key to making the watercolor look even is to keep adding paint to the wet part. It's the wet on wet that makes this smooth blend. So add paint to the edges of where you've painted where it's still wet. And another way to describe that is that I'm pulling this down or pulling this across the paper. And hopefully you've made the sketch dark enough so you can still see it underneath this light gray here. I think I'm already running out of paint actually, and I need to make more. Okay, something like that. And after you've applied all this, you'll notice your paper start to warp. It's gonna make a curve that goes up in the center. That's totally normal, especially with this paper. It will flatten out again later, but it's gonna bow like this as it's soaking up the water. And that's fine. We're gonna leave it like that. Set this aside here. All right. Now we're gonna work on the next part of this value scale, this mid-tone here. And because we're layering, we don't need it to be as dark as what we actually want it to look when it's done, because what we're gonna apply is gonna go on top of this. So I'm gonna kind of put this to the side and make sure I don't accidentally touch it. I'm gonna take the black again, or whatever color was used, and make a slightly darker version of what we just mixed. And I'll test it out on here to make sure it's dark enough. Now that looks really dark because it's a really thick puddle. Let me remove that excess water. That looks about right. We want it a step darker. And it might take some practice to get the exact value correct. Just remember that the one on the very left is going to be black. And you want to make sure this one is not black yet. I'll fill in this here. When I fill that in, it should look a shade darker. And just like earlier, we'll apply this to the ones on the left. And part of the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that as we're building this picture, that our values are where we want them to be before we apply them to the painting. We want to make sure there's a clear distinction between each step. I accidentally painted outside my lines there. Okay, now that we have a sense of how dark this needs to be, we're going to start applying that shade onto here. I need to mix more of it, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And because I'm mixing more and I'm not 100% certain how it'll look, I'm going to test it out on here to make sure it still matches. And I made that too light, so I'm going to adjust. It's too watery. Okay. That's roughly what I'm looking for. I think it looks darker on screen than it does in person. That's all right. At this point, your painting might still be drying a bit, and that's okay. There are some areas where there's going to be a soft edge effect if it's still wet, which I don't mind on mine, but I think mine's actually already dry enough for it to not blend. So let's put in the next step here. What I'm going to do now is outline the foliage so that they are their own separate tone and shape. Oh, I think that already looks too light or too dark. Let me lighten that. So I'm going to go around the foliage that I sketched in, and even also paint in back here. You can kind of look at the painting I have on the very left for reference too. Still looks a little dark to me. I'm gonna, oops. Now I have a lot of water on here. I'm gonna try to remove some or spread it out. It's because my brush had a lot of water on it. If I wanted less water, I would have wiped it on the paper towel before I put it onto the paper. Okay, I'm gonna spread out those bits. Hmm? Oh, oops.
on it.
This one?
Well, no, just because it just is showing the top of your hair.
Oh, and I'm trying to, oh, I could paint from here without leaning over so much. Thanks for letting me know. Well, what we're doing right now is painting in all of the rock and some of the background. Oops, it's a little too wet. So my plan for the next class is to do a colored version of this, and we'll focus on color theory and how to mix the colors to make a cohesive looking landscape painting. And by then, since you've done it once, the drawing might be easier and establishing the values might be easier as well. And we could just focus on the color. If you ever want to remove what you've done, you can rinse your brush, dry it out, and then use that to pick up paint that's still wet, which is what I'm doing right now. Forgot to leave a white line here. And as we work on this, we'll gradually start to fill in more and more detail. It's already starting to come together. Okay, that's our second layer. At this point, you might be noticing the picture starting to come together. You can see the waterfall and the landscape coming out a little bit. Okay. Then for the next part of this value scale here, we're going to do the same thing, go one shade darker. So again, we're going to mix a black that's slightly darker than this middle one. It's a shade darker. gradually using less and less water or just more and more pigment. Okay, need more pigment for that. It should not be black, but it should be almost black, somewhere in between. Mine looks like black on the screen, but it's actually a little bit lighter. If it's too dark, try adding some water, or if you're noticing a bit of a puddle on your surface, you can remove some of that paint and it'll lighten up because it's making the water less thick. Oh, and then I'll do that to this one too. Add another layer right there. Okay. Well, overall, we've established a white, the two lights, and then a mid-tone. Then we're now at the point where we're going to be adding in the shadows more so. And so for this composition, what really works for it is that this part is really dark next to the waterfall. That adds a lot of contrast to that area, which makes your eye be drawn to this section because it's white next to black. It can't get any more contrasted than that. And I want to make sure I have at least that dark there to make that part stand out, and then also down here where the water is on the ground. I'll put that in now. My paper is still a bit wet, so it's going to have a soft edge, just a tad. For this, it's important if it's still wet to make sure your brush is not too wet, otherwise it's going to blend a lot. So one thing I'm doing is, after I've picked up the pigment with my brush, I'm removing some of it by squeezing it off the edge here on one of these ridges. You can see it coming out. And then I'm going to apply it to the paper. I'm expecting this to bloom a bit, like that. If you want it to bloom less, you can make your brush even drier. And this effect can also be used to create contrast in terms of texture or shading. Things that are fuzzier are less in focus than things that are more sharp. So if you want something to look less in focus, one thing you can do is use this wet on wet technique. So the main sections I want to add this to are here, especially. And even though in the photo it's not quite this dark, overall for the composition, I want this to be more or less one shade. So I can group this section. And maybe here we can start to add some of the strokes for the water. Ooh, this is blooming, but it's still wet. Well, maybe I'll leave the middle part a little bit still light. With this tone on the value scale, we can use it to start to add some or paint in some of the texture of the rock. If you look at the photograph in my sample here, there are streaks that are kind of going across from left to right in this direction. I painted those by using some lines going across this way. So on here, what I would do is, especially on the bottom side, to suggest some shadow, and by bottom I mean around here, I'd put it around here, just a few big strokes. Suggest some texture and shadow. And the one I have in my sample is a kind of more detailed. I'm gonna see if I can just simplify that one. So here's a little bit more texture, some streaks going downward, and then something like that. I'm trying to simplify what I'm seeing here by using bigger strokes. A few lines there. You can also outline, put in some of the shadow underneath the leaves with these little marks here. So this part, like I was mentioning earlier, we're getting into shadow and then also a bit of texture. Texture can just be the way you make the marks. For the shadow bit of underneath the leaves, I'm just making these small marks on the bottom sides. Tiny little U shapes, I guess, with the tip of my brush. And right now, you might notice this adds a lot of contrast and makes that foliage stand out a lot. To break that up, I'm also filling in the texture of the rocks around it so it doesn't stand out so much. We're kind of doing a big balancing act right now. I'm filling in these details where it makes the composition look more balanced, not making one part stand out more than I'd like to. So we got some shadow here. There's a big section of rock there. I can put a shadow under. The darkest area overall is on the bottom side because that does suggest shadow when it's more on the bottom side like that. And we might notice some parts of this rock are just overall darker because of the texture or a little bit of shadow. I'm filling that in too. Okay. And lastly, I'm going to pause here. Also filling in this area right above the waterfall to give it more contrast between that background and then all of this foliage and rock here. So it separates this sky. It's not the sky, but it's above um, this area. That's our midground, which is in the, not quite the foreground, but it's not the background either. This is the furthest part. I'm separating it through this different value, making it overall darker than this whole foliage waterfall rock section. So then it makes everything else pop out a bit more. I didn't make this quite one tone. Some areas are a little bit darker, like right here. I am gonna make this darker later anyway, so I'm gonna leave that for now. A little bit more shadow. Okay. How's everyone doing? Oh, all right, this is really good value practice. Squinting always helps if you're not clear on where to place your values. If you squint on mine, I have, it's actually kind of an overall even amount of this second darkest tone all around, but I try to keep it mostly down here. And there's a little texture here. At this point, you could also add some lighter tones on the inside of this waterfall to add some little streaks there. I'm going to go backwards a little bit in tone and go much lighter. I'll test it out on here to make sure it's not too dark. Okay, there are some sections here where there's a break in the waterfall. I'll put it right here. This section here, I use less water to create something that's almost like a dry brush effect, where my brush is so dry, if I pull it across, it leaves this texture. You can test it out on here. You can, and then dry out your brush by wiping a lot of it out on the paper towel before you apply it. So if you like that texture and that effect, you can try that. This is dry brushing. I'm using the very edge of my paintbrush to get that, not the tip, because the tip is loaded with water. And whenever you're ready, you can move on to the darkest darks, the black. On this value scale, it's just straight black, not much water. This is going to stand out quite a bit compared to everything else on your painting. And this one you want to use sparingly because for this composition in particular, because we want this to be mostly midtones. I've got my blackest blacks on the water down here on the edges, and then kind of outlining the waterfall a little bit. And that's going to really make things pop. I'm only going to put this black right next to this waterfall a bit. And then in the shadow area. Some right there. This is still wet, so it's blooming a little bit. If you put this black next to a very light area, it's going to make that part stand out a lot because of the contrast. So you can use that concept to your advantage. Try to balance this out. But wherever I put the black now, it's standing out a lot. And I want to make sure it looks balanced. So I'm going to maybe put some small details with some more black and spread it out a bit. You can use it to outline this bottom edge here. Maybe add some foliage. Hmm. And at this point, you can be refining your painting a bit. Maybe adding other shades or tones. Now that we've established the major, larger parts, this is a good time to add a little bit of detail. Just in some areas that you want to emphasize it, because we're doing kind of a speed painting right now, which is being done in less than an hour. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up in a few minutes? Any comments or concerns? Yeah, landscapes they can be pretty challenging unless they're very simple landscapes. And then balancing tones is a challenge too. Hence, it took me, I think, 4 tries to figure out how I wanted to paint this. You can tell from my little thumbnails here. I made a few. They look pretty similar, but they're slightly different.
This class is scheduled from 1 to 2:30.
Yeah, I think the meeting is 1 to 2:30, but I'm here from 1 to 2. Yeah.
So it's included in that.
Yeah, typically I heard this group meets until 2:30, so it's an hour and a half. So for anyone who wants some homework to practice, I'd recommend doing the same exercise with photographs that you can find, either your own or from the internet, and just try to simplify your values and group them. So you can even make little tiny sketches like I did for this one. These are thumbnails, literally about the size of my thumb. Um, and this really helps to simplify the image because it's so small I can't add any detail, and it gives me a good zoomed out view of what I'm making. So at, at a distance and from squinting at it, I can get an overall sense of where everything is. And then from there, once I have something that looks roughly what I'm looking for, then I enlarge it and make a larger version like this, so I can add in more detail while still practicing grouping the values. And I'd encourage you to not copy the photo exactly unless it already has the values exactly the way you want them. But using a generic photo, try to use your design thinking to see like, okay, what do I want to emphasize here? How do I make it stand out? In this case, we're using contrast in the form of tones. So dark to light. High contrast for the areas that we want to draw focus to, and lower contrast for areas that are of less importance or further away. Another way to create emphasis is with details. So the areas that you want to be in focus, add more details and make them finer and more sharp. Then areas that are less, you can create contrast by, or reduce the contrast by painting it more loosely and bigger, less details. So kind of let everything blur together, or just don't put in the details at all. And we're doing all of that here with this image. We're drawing more attention to the foliage with these little lines here, and especially because they're the darkest I'm using almost black or black for those. And then I'm drawing also a lot of attention to the waterfall because it's white next to black. And that's the only area where there's that much contrast. And then I'm kind of layering each section based on what it is. So the water down here is the darkest. Rocks here are the next darkest. Or sorry, this is mid-tone. And then I could make this a little bit darker back here if I want it to be even more separate from the rest of the image. So that would be, if I were to do that, it'd look like this. And if you decide to practice this at home, don't be afraid of making many versions of the same image. Kind of think about each one as a test to see how different values might look, or just as practice to get the values down. And with each try, you'll learn something new. Yes. Hi, Sherry.
I no problem with that. I close one eye
Uh-huh.
because what my eyes do is once it's closed,
Okay. Well, you're not going to close your eyes, you're going to squint to see the different values. So then you're squinting to where everything looks a little bit darker, but it groups all the darks together and then all the lights stand out more.
Oh,
Like if you compare it to keeping your eyes completely open, these start to kind of merge together
yeah,
in the shading.
yeah.
And so it helps you group everything that's overall darker and overall lighter. And it helps you see the separation.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't close one eye and open the other. You gotta
okay. Well,
kind of squint.
I try to squint, but
Yeah, if that's too hard, then that's no problem. It's kind of just something that helps, but you
yeah.
don't have to have it or have to do it.
Okay, because my eyes, like I said, one sees far, one sees close, and so basically, eye doctor said can't use glasses because you feel that way more.
No worries.
So,
It's more of a nice thing to try and do if you can, but otherwise you don't have to. You don't have to do it in order to make the painting.
you know, that's not too bad though.
Yeah. That's a good start.
I can still work.
Yeah. So then before we wrap up, just one thing about the tape. Don't take it off until this is dry because if you take it off while it's wet, it might rip the paper. So wait for it to dry first, and then once you peel it off, it should leave this really satisfying clean edge. And you can do it gently too. Yeah, the washi tape's really nice. Mine's still wet. I'm gonna leave it. I'm afraid of ripping it. You can carry it around like this until it dries. This might take a while because we added many layers to it. Or mine is gonna take a while at least. I spent more time on the one I have on the left, which is why it has more detail. This is a quicker version that we did here.